Hey folks, it's Gary, and we're here today to talk about Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. This is the first book in the 10-volume Malazan Book of the Fallen. Also today, we'll be finding out if the lavalier mics that I keep paying for work on any device, anywhere, ever. This is a huge, epic, sweeping fantasy series full of wonder and mystery and trauma and grief and human emotion. But today, we're just going to talk about Gardens of the Moon. This runs to 666 pages in mass market paperback, but I mostly read the ebook. I did try some immersion reading alongside the audiobook in this case. I might talk about that in a separate video at some point. Now, if you're concerned about spoilers, do not sweat it. There's nothing in this video that you wouldn't know by reading the back of the book and maybe the first 50 pages or so. We're not really going to talk about this today, but there are other series set in the Malazan universe by both Steven Erikson and his co-creator of this world, Ian C. Esselmont. The 10-book Malazan Book of the Fallen series, however, is what we call the main series, and everything else kind of orbits around that. This is what you should read first. I recommend against trying to get creative with the reading order. Now, this first book was written several years before the rest of the series, and for me it was a reread. I read the first 4 books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen in the early 2000s. I stalled out on Book 5, Midnight Tides, for reasons that will be touched on in this video, but here it is in 2024, and I've decided to give the entire series another crack. And given that it's been 20 plus years since I read the things and that it's generally complicated, I decided the best way to do that was to start over completely from scratch with a reread of the first 4. The video won't be too long, but if you don't want to wait, it's good. You should read it. Now, these books have a reputation for difficulty, and we do need to talk about that. It's usually said something like, Steven Erikson does not hold your hand, but it's worth breaking down a little bit exactly the ways in which Erikson declines to hold your hand as you're reading these. The most obvious thing is that nowhere in this book is there any kind of sustained expository dump. You get little bits of exposition here and there in the dialogue and in the actions, but you have to put that together yourself. Erikson trusts you to make those connections. And the good news is that he is also allowing us to feel rewarded when we do that. Now, you'll find yourself asking questions, and there are open questions after every chapter or even every scene, and for these books, that's actually pretty normal. You should pay very close attention to the dialogue, to the word choices, and even in the things that Erikson chooses not to say. I don't want to say that every single word is placed with deliberate purpose here, but it does kind of feel like that. Even the miscellaneous background quotes at the beginnings of the sections and chapters and stuff like that have things to reveal in them, and in some cases they're things that would be considered spoilers somewhere down the line. Second, this book is written in a pretty conventional third-person limited point of view, but instead of changing points of view at the beginning of each new chapter, like a lot of modern fantasy authors tend to do, Erikson can change point of view as often as in every scene. In fact, you will seldom encounter scenes within a chapter where consecutive scenes are told from the same point of view. You do get used to this, but it can be jarring, and you may find yourself asking, who am I looking at here when you start a new scene? The upside is that basically nothing awesome happens off camera. If it's happening, and if it's cool, and if it's part of this story, it is happening on screen, and you are seeing it, even if you're not seeing it, from one of the quote-unquote main characters that the story revolves around a little bit more. Third, both the world and the magic system present in these books are incredibly ornate and intricate. There are dozens of races and cultures, even in just this first book. There's a number of different ways to magical power. There's an array of gods, weak and strong, young and old. There's a lot happening, a lot going on. And the interesting thing is, even the most world-weary characters in this setting don't know all of its secrets. Even those folks get to be surprised from time to time. This is not a Sandersonian type of setting that's designed according to a set of specific constraints and is designed to be revealed in a specific way. The setting, by the way, was originally developed by Erikson and Ian C. Esselmont for tabletop role-playing games. They tried to sell it as a screenplay at one point and then finally settled on novels as the right way to deliver it, and I'm glad they chose how they did. I feel like that's pretty dangerous because a lot of books with settings that came out of games feel like exactly that. Malazan doesn't. This world feels lush and rich and organic and lived in, and I expect that Erikson's own background as an anthropologist probably contributed to his ability to design it that way. Now, you absolutely do need to pay close attention while reading this. The author's going to give you absolutely everything you need to know to understand the story and what's going on here, but there are going to be a lot of additional threads that will not pay off until later books, and you do need to be comfortable with that. So don't expect every mystery to be unraveled or every enigma to be revealed. You're going to be a bit baffled at least some of the time, certainly with the more metaphysical aspects of this world. But you will learn as you go, and you might end up feeling really incredibly rewarded as you put some of those puzzle pieces together and discover those things on your own. I did feel like I needed to reread some sections immediately to completely understand what was going on, but in all but one case, toward the end of the book, the narration does hold together and you are given all the information that you need. But you do need to read closely. That specific section I was talking about does happen later in the book, and the narrative there does feel a little bit disjointed, but I think that's because Erikson is trying to make everything move really quickly. I don't feel like I can sum up this story in a way that is both useful and spoiler-free, so instead I'm going to give you this setup of the book. This is nothing that you won't see in the first, say, 50 or 75 pages or so. The Malazan Empire, led by the relatively recently ascended Empress Lysine, is in the middle of a series of wars of conquest. They've set their sights on another continent called Genebacus and on the free cities on that continent. At the beginning of the book, the city of Pale is under siege, and you will see right away how that goes down. It is messy. In fact, it's really interesting that there's battles at the end of the book too. I'm not going to shock anybody by saying that, but the big set piece battle here, the Siege of Pale, actually happens in chapter 2. That's very unusual structurally. Next in the Empress's sights is the last of the free cities, Darujistan, and a number of plots are set in motion to either take the city or save the city or to accomplish certain other things inside the city, and a lot of these threads will come together at the end of the book, which is really satisfying. But again, some of these threads will not pay off until later volumes in the series. The characters in this book are both vivid and complex. I think you will find them satisfying. Both you as the reader and the characters themselves will question the humanity of their choices. And Erikson, unlike a lot of people writing things that are kind of tonally similar to this, will not use either contrivance or trauma to take away characters' agency. The characters' own choices, sometimes they are off-stage characters, but the characters' own choices will drive the events of this book, and these characters will have to live with those choices. The voices of the characters are generally very distinct. A lot of times you know exactly what character you're seeing the current scene through their eyes before their name is even dropped. Erikson's style here is a bit of an odd combination of both sparsity and density. It can be laden with gravitas, but a lot of the dialogue, for example, feels really grounded. It's the way that a lot of people actually talk to one another. It's not particularly flowery. The sort of deliberation of the book comes in the prose rather than in the world building and the plot. As the book enters its third act, all of these things begin to converge. The characters and the plot and the themes all come together for an ending that I found immensely satisfying. But in a way, the book's strong ending can actually confound you as the reader, because you might step forward to the next book, Dead House Gates, and this does not feel like a sequel at all, even though it's set in the same world. We're on a different continent. Almost none of the characters are the same characters that we just spent an entire book with, and all of the plot threads are different plot threads. There are things running through all of the books, that's absolutely true, but you have to be okay with not everything getting wrapped up in a single volume, whether it's this book or book 5 or whatever it is. I'll say again that I think you're kind of better off approaching these early books at least as kind of independent but linked standalones, but you can't really skip them. They lay down too much groundwork that you will need to understand what's going on later on. And there are a bunch of examples that I'm not going to give you because spoilers. I came into August thinking that Brandon Sanderson's Oathbringer was obviously the best book I was going to read all year. I am somewhat surprised and absolutely delighted to have been absolutely incorrect. And not only was I wrong, this came from a completely unexpected place. This was a book I had read before and thought was good, And on this reread, I think it's an absolutely amazing book. Literally, as I'm filming this right now, my head is batting back and forth whether I liked Oathbringer more or I liked Gardens of the Moon more. I'm looking forward to getting through book 2 and seeing how I feel about my reread of that, if I feel the same way, as though great vistas have once again opened up for me. So I'll have to figure that out for myself as I step into book 2. Now, when I rated this book at 3 stars on Goodreads, it was many years after I had actually read the book, so I was just going on recollection. I have just re-rated the book on Goodreads. This is a 5-star book. This is an amazing book, a kickoff to an amazing series, and I hope that Erikson can continue to pull these books off as well as he does here. This is not a weak book. Maybe it's the weakest book in the series. A lot of people feel that it is. As of right now, where I'm at with the reread complete of book 1 and stepping into the additional books, I think this is an extraordinary book.